achieved.
I will give you a moment to catch your breath. Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson. And on this episode of the show, we're breaking in the upcoming UFC on Fox 16 event, which will take place on July 25th. And it has 4 fights in the main card, including a bantamweight title fight. We'll get to that momentarily. But what I was referring to in my intro was we are coming off UFC's International Fight Week, which featured 4 cards in 8 days. There were 55 fights in total. I predicted 53, leaving the 2 Ultimate Fighter matchups off just because of time. And I felt I handled myself admirably in the run. Of the 53 fights, I went 40-13. That's a pretty solid run. I picked up a number of big upset picks. The last one we saw Evan Dunham defeating Ross Pearson in the co-main event at UFC Fight Night 72. The bet packs produced over 130 units in winnings, which is pretty decent, and it would have been a lot more. I had a number of parlays that just missed out by one fighter, including Michelle Waterson failing to submit Angela Magana 7 seconds earlier. That would have been huge. Or Todd Duffy knocking out Frank Mir. If that had gone that way, it would have produced a lot more. But I know horseshoes and hand grenades, you can only... it doesn't matter how close you get. If you're not all the way there, you are not a winner. Now, as I said, 4 fights in this main card. It looks pretty darn exciting. I'll get to that in a moment. One thing I would like to touch upon as well, with regard to what we've seen recently with Fight Pass, we have recently seen, of course, UFC showing Invicta cards, getting association with Invicta, and now adding Titan FC to the fold as airing their cards. What I would like to see is some kind of organizational agreement set up between the UFC and these smaller promotions that they can start transferring fighters. So, for example, instead of cutting guys, if you have a fighter who's lost 3 or 4 in a row, transfer him to Titan FC or transfer her to Invicta and offer them the opportunity to fight there for a couple of cards and say, look, fight there, you have to fight there a minimum 2 or 3 fights. If you do well and rebound, we will bring you back and give you another opportunity, maybe another fight in the UFC. And it will kind of give it a little bit of a safety net, a little bit of an opportunity for the UFC to both build up some talent. At the same time, it would grow the cards of these other organizations that they are now showing on their Fight Pass. So it's kind of a win-win in that scenario, and it gives the fighters, as I said, a little bit of a safety net where, okay, I'm struggling right now. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to be cut. I will give you an opportunity. If I go to Titan FC or if I go to Invicta and I can't pick up 2 or 3 wins there and get the call back to the UFC, unfortunately, I probably am not deserving of my roster spot. So I think that would be something worth looking into. I think it has some definite plausible applications. But either way, we've got 4 main card fights. Let's get to that first prediction. The opening fight of the night takes place in the UFC's lightweight division as Joe Lauzon, 24-11-0, takes on the returning Fireball Kid, Takanori Gomi, with a current record of 35 wins, 10 losses, and a single no contest. Now what we have here are 2 veteran lightweights, no longer in title contention, not even near the conversation, but they're looking to piece together some wins to remain on the big stage, and that's what they're both looking at here. Gomi's coming off the first knockout loss of his career, and it stings a little bit more because it happened at home in Japan. Overall, he's 3-4 in his last 7 fights, and he's coming into this matchup with a 10-month layoff before his previous matchup against Miles Jury. For Joe Lauzon, he's coming off a TKO loss to Ali Aquinta, the 4th knockout loss of his career, which ended a mini 2-fight winning streak, which included a TKO victory over Michael Chiesa and a decision win over Mac Danzig. And it's interesting to know both guys have recent victories over Danzig, both Gomi and Lauzon. Now, physically, Lauzon 3 inches taller, he'll have a 1-inch reach advantage, and he happens to be 6 years younger than Gomi. Both guys have massive road wear, though. Keep in mind here, they have long careers. Gomi's fought 46 times, Lauzon's fought 34 times. They've both been through wars, so their age not playing as big a role as their MMA road miles, we'll call it. For Gomi, 13 wins by knockout, which is his big number. He's 16-3 in fights that go the distance, which is pretty remarkable considering of how he strikes, but is 6-6 in fights ended by submission, which is a big number that stands out when you're considering who he's fighting. He got submitted by Kenny Florian, he got submitted by Clay Guida, he got submitted by Nate Diaz, all in the UFC. 3 of those losses coming in his first 4 UFC bouts, but he hasn't been tapped out in his last 5 matchups going back to 2011. For Lauzon, he's a BJJ brown belt. 18 of his wins have come by submission. He's 5-4 in fights ended by knockout. And surprisingly enough, for a veteran like him, he's 1-3 when the judges are involved. Does not have, and the only one being that Mac Danzig win. Some of his knockout losses to Ali Aquinta by TKO, and before that, a KO, a brutal head kick knockout against Anthony Pettis. Now, for Takanori Gomi, he's incredibly unorthodox as far as his striking style is concerned. He likes to paw the jab out there, throws a big right hand, some hard left hook to the liver. He will counter-strike at times, can punch going backwards. Not a ton of kicks, and he certainly has that big knockout power, as the numbers would suggest. Tyson Griffin, one of the guys falling to him recently. He commits everything to his punches, though, which can be good if they connect. He throws incredible heat, but he's not overly accurate. He puts himself off balance, especially if he misses, and he's had trouble with more technical strikers. Additionally, his cardio is a question, which goes back to that all-or-nothing approach to striking. He struggled with the pace of Isaac Valley Flag despite winning that matchup, and the pressure that Valley Flag put on him really gave him some issues and prevented him from setting up his strikes. Not a ton of wrestling from the Japanese fighter. He did get a takedown in his last matchup and took his opponent's back, but he focuses his wrestling more on his takedown defense, which currently sits at 66%. Prior to the jury fight, he had been taken down in 5 of his last 6 matchups, the only one being the Tyson Griffin knockout. So it certainly shows an area of vulnerability that Lauzon could look to capitalize on. Now, Lauzon is a very quick starter, and I think he's going to use it to try and tax Gomi's cardio. His cardio isn't awesome either, but he tends to keep pressing forward, and if he can slow his opponent down, I think he will have the advantage. He likes to use the clinch, force his opponent to work in there, and I think he'll do that to Gomi here. Look for takedowns from that position. He doesn't have a great wrestling background, but he can be very tricky on the mat once he gets it there. We saw him against Michael Chiesa, a very good grappler. He took Chiesa's back almost instantly once they hit the ground. And, he has a nice variety of submissions. He will dive on limbs, legs, arms, whatever he can get a hold of. Even standing, he'll try and rotate the back or jump on a leg if he gets the opportunity. Chain his submissions together. We saw him catch Jamie Varner very late in a very entertaining, grueling matchup with a late submission there. If he's on top and can't get the submission, look for slicing elbows. Keep that ground and pound going until something opens up. Lauzon's striking is serviceable. It's not great. He throws long strikes, decent 1-2. He will use volume more than anything. We did see him catch Melvin Gallar with a quick shot that dropped him before getting submitted. And he opened up Michael Chiesa for the doctor stoppage with a big, I think it was an elbow or a right hand on the feet. I can't remember which one. His defensive game isn't great. He does take a lot of damage. 4.67 strikes absorbed per minute. He does not want to do that against Gomi. He tends to shell up, does not want Gomi unloading on him. He has been boxed up with more technical strikers. Again, that's not Gomi's style. I think Lauzon uses his pressure and clinch game to mute Gomi's power striking, makes it a dirty, grueling fight, eventually gets it to the mat. And my prediction is Joe Lauzon to defeat Takanori Gomi by submission. Fight number 2 in the main card remains in the UFC's lightweight division. It's the number 7th ranked Edson Jr. Barboza, 15-3-0, takes on Paul the Irish Dragon Felder, undefeated at 10 wins, no losses, and no draws. Now, Barboza is coming off a decision loss to Michael Johnson. He had won 2 in a row in 5 of his last 6 preceding that. For Felder, he's still undefeated in his very young career, including 2 wins in the UFC, stopping Danny Castillo in his most recent outing, obviously the biggest win of his career. He was initially tabbed to face Jim Miller at UFC on Fox 15, but a knee injury for Felder forced him out of that matchup, so he gets the opportunity to step in here. Both guys have a common opponent in the aforementioned Castillo. Barboza winning a decision after nearly getting knocked out early on. Felder scoring a beautiful spinning back fist KO in the second round of that matchup when he fought Castillo. Physically, same height. Barboza, though, a marked 5-inch reach advantage, and he happens to be 2 years younger, despite the fact he's been in the UFC for a lot longer than Mr. Felder. Both guys have pretty solid accreditations. Edson is a black belt in Taekwondo and Muay Thai and a BJJ purple belt. For Felder, a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo, a black belt in Karate, and a BJJ blue belt. Felder, exceptionally smooth, very technical with his striking. He moves really well. Not a lot of combinations, but he did a very effective job of keeping Danny Castillo on the outside, limiting the damage he took, and really did a nice job of shutting his striking down just with his footwork and approach and stance and ability to anticipate and avoid damage. 7 of his 10 wins have come by knockout compared to 3 decisions, so it shows how he does have a lot of knockout power. Now, he is primarily a kicker at range. Against Castillo, of the 33 strikes he landed, 18 of them were kicks. So that should tell you where his focus tends to be. And against Edson Barboza, that tends to be very interesting. He has a lot of very quick kicks, limited windup, which can be very effective in keeping his kicks disguised. Hard low kicks. He will go to the body as well, throw some nice spinning attacks, and overall has a very strong kicking game. When he took out Castillo, brutal spinning back fist. It was kind of reactionary after Castillo kind of closed the distance and attacked, and Felder spun and knocked him out. Now for Barboza, we're very well versed in what he brings to the table. If you're not already, listen up. He's a devastating kicker. We already talked about his Muay Thai base. Leg kicks are the type of kicks that can really turn a fight on its head. He throws some very strong body kicks, a nice variety of spinning attacks that he will throw. We saw that brutal knockout of Terry Adam back in the day. And he can get his kicks off very quickly with limited room. 9 of his wins have come by knockout, including 3 TKOs due to leg strikes where his opponent could not continue on. I think 2 came in the UFC. Mike Lulo and Rafael Oliveira are the 2, I believe, off the top of my head. He has decent hands, but he has had trouble with his boxing defense. 3.8 strikes landed per minute versus 3.3, so a little bit too close for my liking for a guy who's primarily a striker. He has been tagged with some big shots before we saw him get knocked out by Jamie Varner and buzzed by Cerrone before getting submitted, so there are some questions about his chin. When he fought Bobby Green, he moved around the perimeter very well. Basically, he moved around, found a point, stopped, engaged, and continued to move around before he reset himself and attacked again. He used his kicks to keep range in that matchup. But when he fought Michael Johnson, he had a lot of trouble with the pressure that Johnson brought to the game. It took away his kicking attack, and he's not the same fighter when he's forced to move backwards and doesn't have the time to set up his attacks. Unfortunately for Paul Felder, at least so far, that's not been his style. He likes to stand at range, very calculated, very calm, kind of stick in the pocket and exchange. And the question is, if that's the case, who's going to be more impactful in this matchup? Felder could try to use his grappling game to add an alternative aspect of the fight with Barboza. He's got pretty good takedown defense. He's landed some takedowns as well. We've seen him in the past land the odd takedown. It's not likely, but I would give Felder, of the 2, the more likely to go for a takedown. I don't think Barboza is going to shoot at all. Barboza, for my money, appears to be the faster fighter, and his kicks seem more impactful. And I think he will really enjoy being at range and fighting a fighter that's going to engage him in the same approach that he primarily likes to use. Felder's still very early in his MMA game and could show some unanticipated growth. For example, his wrestling, or he could show us another wrinkle that we can't anticipate, at least not from this vantage point. This is a big step up in competition for Felder compared to anyone he's faced. It's an absolute test for Edson Barboza. If he does lose this matchup, his quest to be elite / a title challenger is pretty much over. I think he gets it done, though, so my prediction is Edson Barboza to defeat Paul Felder. I'll take Barboza by decision. Co-main event time, and we're looking at the ladies here. Is the number 2 ranked UFC women's bantamweight fighter on the planet, Miesha Cupcake Tate, 16-5-0, takes in number 5, Jessica Evil Eye, with a record of 11 wins, 2 losses, and 1 no contest. Now, this apparently has been dubbed a number 1 contender's bout, even though we see this all the time and it gets kiboshed after the fact, sometimes before, but it's been dubbed the number 1 contender's bout, so we could be looking at Miesha Tate versus Ronda Rousey 3, or Jessica Eye getting a shot at the title, which would obviously be fresh blood and a fresh opportunity for Rousey to fight a new opponent. Keep in mind, I at one point had been tabbed to fate. She was put in the Chad Mendez role when Kat Zingano fought Ronda Rousey. I was told, prepare, we'll pay you, be ready like Mendez was for McGregor. Although, if Kat pulls out, we want you to step in and fight for the title. So she has had a close encounter with the title before, but never actually fought the champion. Coming into this, Miesha Tate has won 3 in a row, including an upset of Sarah McMahon. She stole a decision from Liz Carmouche and had a very uninspired win against Rin Nakai. So it's been a very interesting winning streak nonetheless. For Eye, she's coming off a doctor stoppage win over Leslie Smith, preceded by a split decision loss against Alexis Davis, and a victory turned no contest against Sarah Kaufman. I think it was for a failed drug test. And people felt that the decision was terrible in that matchup. They felt, myself included, felt Kaufman should have won that fight. Physically, the girls are very similar. Same age, same height. Eye with a minuscule 1-inch reach advantage. And keep in mind here, both Eye is a former flyweight moving up to bantamweight, and Tate has talked about going down to 125 pounds because she feels it might work better for her. So it'll be interesting to see what these guys do if that division does show up in the UFC. Now, Tate comes from a wrestling background, BJJ purple belt, 3 wins by knockout, 6 wins by submission, and she is 7-1 when the judges get involved. In the loss category, 2 knockout losses, 2 losses by submission, both coming to Ronda Rousey. For Eye, comes from a boxing background, an amateur boxing background. She has 3 wins by knockout, though, 1-1 in fights ending by submission, and she is also 7-1 when going the distance, which appears to be her primary method of operation. For the most part, what we have here is a striker in Eye versus a grappler in Miesha Tate, so it depends on who keeps the fight in their realm will most likely win this matchup. When you look at Eye first, her strikes landed per minute is a massive advantage. She lands 3.41 strikes more per minute than Miesha Tate. She does give up a lofty total, but the point is she outstrikes and she should be the busier fighter against Miesha Tate on the feet. She has very fast hands, good footwork. She looked exceptionally good against Leslie Smith, but in that matchup she knew Smith was going to throw down with her and strike, and that gives a striker the ability to really unleash and let go when they're not worrying about being taken down. High volume, nice punch kick combinations, throws a nice straight left, step in with a hard right to follow it up. She can counter strike, especially with that right hand, will go to the body, can work in close to some dirty boxing as well. When she fought Sarah Kaufman, who's an exceptional striker in her own right, she had a lot of trouble with the power of Kaufman and got rocked in the 3rd round, a round that some judges still gave eyeing on the fact, even though Kaufman had her in a lot of trouble. Against Alexis Davis, she actually had some success tying Davis up and pinning her on the cage, but ultimately she lost that fight, at least the second round, because she was taken down by Davis, pinned on her back, actually to end the first round and couldn't get up, and spent the entire second round of being taken down, pinned on her back, and that's definitely a red flag heading into this matchup. She showed good stamina in that fight, still being able to come out in the third round and be aggressive and strike after being beaten up on the mat, but nonetheless, she lost that fight primarily on her defensive grappling. For Miesha Tate, in her last fight, she showed a lot of heart. She got cracked by Sarah McMahon early, recovered, and rallied back to win. She tends to carry her left hand low, which could be an issue against Ai's right hand or power hand if she can connect. What we did see with Tate, though, against McMahon, she landed some good strikes early on, forced McMahon to shoot, counter with the guillotine, and eventually it led to Tate taking control of the grappling scenarios, surprisingly enough, against an Olympic silver medalist in wrestling. For Tate, she averages 2.4 takedowns at a 36% completion rate, but she has lost the takedown battle 15-3 over her last 4 fights. Did have success taking Kat Zingano down and keeping her there for the most part until eventually she got knocked out. She gets in trouble when she tries to showcase her striking instead of using her grappling, and that could be the case here. Can I defend the takedowns is the big question. She should have the advantage in the feet. I think she's most likely drilling her counter wrestling or sprawl and brawl to keep this in her realm of dominance. Both girls are known for fighting exceptionally close fights. It seems like Ai's had trouble winning some fights, or at least especially against Alexis Davis, and separating herself, where at times Miesha Tate's able to convince the judges she's a deserved of the win more than she actually is. I think it comes down to this. Miesha Tate's going to land those takedowns. I did not like the way I got pinned by Alexis Davis on the mat. Miesha Tate's an exceptional top position player. I think that shows up here. She lands the takedowns. She controls top position. She eats up the time. And my prediction is Miesha Tate to defeat Jessica Ai by decision. We now move to the main event of the evening, and we're in the UFC's Bantamweight division as the champion, 12-2-0, TJ Dillashaw of Team Alpha Male, takes on the former champion, the man he unseated for the title, the number 1 ranked Renan the Baron Barao of Brazil with a record of 35-2-0, 1 no contest. He is representing the Nova União camp. Now, taking a look here, as I said, this is the second meeting. It's actually the third attempt to make this second meeting happen. They initially fought at UFC 173 where Dillashaw pulled off the upset. He was considered, it was a massive question mark regarding why he's in this fight. He's on a 1-fight winning streak. A lot of people thought it was just kind of an additional add-on for Barao to continue building his resume, and TJ thought otherwise. That was an exceptionally big win for Team Alpha Male coming into that because Nova União had dominated the head-to-head matchups where Aldo and Barao were beating the crap out of Chad Mendes and Uriah Faber, respectively. And that was a huge win for Team Alpha Male to get that belt in their corner. As I said, these guys were initially scheduled to face at UFC 177, where Barao fell ill from the weight cut at the last moment, pulled out. They were rescheduled to fight at UFC 186. TJ pulled out due to injury in that matchup, and here we are at UFC on Fox 16, and last time I did a prediction at UFC 177 for this event, I predicted the fight and talked about how it could fall apart. It still could fall apart before we get there, so we'll see if that happens. TJ, his last matchup was at UFC 177 against Joe Soto when he defended his title. He's had 11 months since that fight, a layoff. Barao, 7 months since facing Mitch Gagnon in his return to action. Barao, 3-inch reach advantage, same height, and Renan Barao, surprisingly enough, is 1 year younger than the champion. Now, the first fight, TJ was much quicker. He used a lot of movement. He focused on dragging the fight into deep waters, and it paid off for him, even though he was dominating early on. For Barao, he was slowing down basically from the get-go and unable to keep up, and that showed up significantly. TJ, why he was so successful, he was throwing a lot of variety, uppercuts, kicks, threw a Superman punch periodically, switched his stances, threw from a variety of angles. He was exceptionally fluid, light on his feet, something no one else had done against Renan Barao in the past. Barao was having a lot of trouble reaching him, even though he had the reach advantage, due to a lot of the strikes, the speed, the unpredictability of his opponent that really cost him. We saw Barao get dropped with a big right hand late in the first round that basically set the table for TJ's Dillashaw's dominance for the rest of that matchup. Now, TJ was throwing a lot of high and body kicks, disguises it well. So with his body kicks, again, or his head kicks, he was disguising them very well, and eventually with the finish was brought about by a kick and the barrage of punches to eventually lead to the referee stoppage to claim the title. Barao, though, he was in trouble in round 3, battered and tired for the most part heading into that round. You could really see that TJ had put a beating on him, both taxed his cardio and just beat up his body, and TJ was still moving forward, and Renan had no answer for that. Now, coming into this matchup, TJ needs to still remain confident, but not undervalue the striking and dangerous nature of his opponent. He is the champion, so the pressure is now on him, which is a big factor in this fight. And for Barao in the last fight, he talked about having a bad camp, possibly underestimating TJ Dillashaw, not taking the fight serious. I expect him to be more motivated and more focused coming into this fight. Now, when we saw Barao fight Mitch Gagnon, I wasn't blown away. I thought he should have blown the doors off Gagnon, even though I respect what Mitch is capable of. If Renan Barao is the champion or is the deserved champion, I thought he should have had a better performance, despite actually the fact that he finished him. He did use his speed fairly well, used his length well, but that's not, the things that TJ took away from him and did not allow him to utilize in that fight, and that's why I really question Barao's ability to come back and win this fight. For TJ, he looked good against Joe Soto, but many expected him to smash Soto quickly. It took him to the 5th round before he eventually knocked him out. But you look back at it, it was a high-risk, low-reward fight for the champion. He was taking on a no-name opponent, or at least opponent not known to most people, on very exceptionally short notice. He could have easily pulled out. It would have destroyed the entire event, because it was already a pretty weak event to start with. He still fought. He fought smart. He fought his game. He got the win. The 11-month layoff, though, after that is a little bit concerning. For Barao, in this matchup, he needs to be more aggressive. Back TJ down. Don't let him set the pace. More kicks to limit his footwork. Possibly look for a takedown to throw him off. And forget the spinning crap. That taxes his body way too much. Keep it simple. Look for leg kicks that could take away from that distance and potentially, as I said, take the footwork away by slowing down and taking away TJ's base. But that approach could very well tax Renan's cardio and just be too much for him to carry over 5 rounds if he cannot get the finish. For TJ, he needs to bring a similar approach. Use a diverse game plan, but don't stand in front of him, which other opponents have done in the past, and which TJ did not do in his victory. He could incorporate more takedowns, use his wrestling a little bit to add another wrinkle to keep Renan Barao off. But again, if it works, it ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess. I think this fight will be close early on. I think TJ would pull away as the fight progresses, if it does actually progress. But big rematches that follow epic first encounters often end much quicker than the first fight. Both guys have now had multiple camps, especially with the fights being canceled, multiple camps to prepare for one another, so they're very well versed in what each man brings to the table. A lot of familiarity there, and my prediction is TJ Dillashaw to defeat Renan Barao and retain his title. I've got TJ Dillashaw doing it by knockout, possibly inside the first 2.5 rounds. So those are my 4 main card predictions for the upcoming UFC on Fox 16 event. All of my preliminary predictions, as always, will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net, along with the bet packs, along with the prediction panel, and those guys have been awesome as well, kicking out predictions over this very short period of time with a lot of fights. Also, the polls are up. You can vote on who you think is going to win each fight. Check all of that information out as well. And just one final thing for me to complain about heading into the conclusion. I see a lot of times, I'm kind of expecting this with Paul Felder a little bit. You see a lot of times on the boards, the forums, people talk about, they do who versus who, and they show their, they brag about their complete ignorance when it comes to certain fighters, saying, I don't know who this guy is, and I don't know who this guy is, therefore they don't matter. Well, why brag about not knowing who fighters are? Take 5 minutes, go to Wikipedia at the very least, or any other site that keeps track of information as far as records are concerned. Go to Fight Pass and watch a couple fights if you have a package there. Either way, if you're a true fight fan, especially with the main card coming up, you should know a little bit if you're going to talk about those fights with any amount of confidence whatsoever. Don't be that idiot who's like, who versus who? I'm too cool to know who these guys are. Either way, that's my rant for now. Thank you as always for tuning in. I'll talk to you guys in the not too distant future.